Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from November 11th, 2022, and I'm recording this on May 11th, 2023. I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually relevant because the market is always moving and changing. So next week, these prices might be different than what I'm reporting right now. So as always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. Each week they put out a list of 10. Both put out a list of 10. We look at those books to get a feel for what was trending in the market, what were people chasing 6 months ago, why were they chasing it, what were the reasons that books were hot in the moment, and we look now and see how they're doing. And even 6 months later, we can really see a lot of difference in where books are, what their prices are going for. So we all make better decisions about what books we're patient on, what books we think are worth chasing. If you've been following this list for any length of time, you know the vast majority of books you're better off being patient for, but there are some patterns here in terms of patience versus maybe a book that's worth it, that hopefully we can learn from. This week between the two lists, we got 16 books to talk about. So let's dig in, see if we can learn anything this week. First up, we have Gears of War, number 1, from 2008. And obviously, this is an adaptation of the video game. And we got news that Netflix was working on a live-action movie for Gears of War. So that was coming. So that's what caused this book to hit the list. Back then, raw copies were going for $25 to $40. Still going for $20 to $50, which would make it steady and worth it on the raw side. But 9.8s were going for $265 plus back then. Now a 9.8 would cost you $115 to $150, and there were enough 9.8 sales. I felt like, yeah, we'll call this down in a trap on the 9.8 side. Overall, definitely, there was actually nearly as many of those sales as there were. Well, there's probably a little more raw sales, but a lot of 9.8 sales here that really demonstrate that this book was definitely down. Next, we have Raiders of the Lost Ark, number 1 from 1981, the first appearance of Indiana Jones in a comic. Now, this is a reprint of a magazine. This is the comic. This was a 3-issue comic series of the movie, adaptation of the movie. There was a magazine that came out before this, but this is the first in a comic-sized book that people were chasing back then. And this has all had to do with the new Indiana Jones movie that's coming this summer, Dial of Destiny. Back then, raw copies were going for $10 to $15. Now, 9.8 was going for $350 to $380. Now it's a $5 to $15 book. So really, raw copies have dropped back a little bit, not a whole lot. Only 2 recent 9.8 sales, $265 and $330. So you could argue maybe borderline trap on the 9.8 size, but because there's only 2 sales, we're not going to do that this time. We're going to stick to the raw side and just call it a down, and then I'll be back for Raiders of the Lost Ark, number 1. Next, we're going to move into covers. Not a ton of covers this week, only 4 covers really to talk about. A good diversity of why books were hitting the list this week, which we don't always get. First up, we have, for covers, we have Dark Ride, number 2, the Agnes Garbowski, Tony Fleets, 1 in 25. This is another Disney movie homage to this Dark Ride series. They had a Little Mermaid one on number 1. On number 2, they had a Beauty and the Beast one. Back then, 1 in 25 going for $35 to $50. Usually it's not a good sign. Usually means it's going to end up at or below ratio. That's the case here. It's a $15 to $30 book now. 9.8 only went for $50. Yeah, this is a trap. This book is definitely backed up and has not held any of that value, which is, it's really followed the 1 in 25 pattern right here of if it only gets to less than double ratio, it's going to end up basically ratio or below, and that's where we're at here. Next, we have Gargoyles Ash Can from 2022. So we had like the retailer incentive Ash Can a few weeks ago that was very limited, like 500 or 300 of those. This is the 1 per store Ash Can that went out. $30 to $70 on this one back then. Now, only $5 to $35. 9.8 went for $65. So, yeah, this has basically become a dumpster fire. I mean, most of these sales are 20 or under. 9.8 at $65. which is less than raw copies were going back then. Just not a lot of sustained interest in this new Gargoyle series, or maybe just in this Ash Can in general, at least from a value collecting standpoint. Next, we have Death of Superman, 30th anniversary, the pink foil variant. So I guess there's multiple foil variants that came out for this. Not sure why Superman got a pink foil one, but he did. So back then, though, this pink foil, I didn't find the numbers on how limited this was, but it appears to have been pretty limited. But it was going for $400 for raw copies back then. Now it's $100 to $200 book for a raw copy. 9.8, $235 to $325, so less than the raw copies back then for a 9.8 now. Yeah, this is a dumpster fire. That's more than a 50% drop in the raw value. And yeah, a book that definitely has not sustained. I haven't really looked at this 30th anniversary, if it's kind of worth, if the book and the story was fun. I think it was kind of fun. They were trying to tell it from other people's perspective, what they told in the 92 book. But yeah, definitely hasn't held up for this pink foil. Next, we have Superman 75, the special edition, the Dan Jurgens 1 in 25, and maybe this is the one that's told from other people's perspectives. Can't remember now. I think that's actually this one and not the 30th anniversary thing. But anyway, this 1 in 25 was going for 40 to 50 back then. So generally, that means not going to be, like we saw with the Dark Ride thing, usually means it's going to end up around ratio or below. But the sales here don't really indicate that. $60 raw sale, but there's only one recent raw sale of this 1 in 25. The 9.8s are 90 to 150, with more of the sales toward the 150 than the 90 side. So we're going to put this as steady and worth it. Based on that $60 sale. Not enough raw sales for me to call it up because there's just the one, but we'll go with steady and worth it on this one. People definitely interested in this, and obviously this is the panel that's on the cover of her holding him after the battle. So that is our Superman 75 special edition. Next we have Superman 75. Obviously the original book was getting some love. The A cover, the flag cover, not the polybag one, was the one that people were kind of chasing back then, or was getting more of the love, I should say. Back then, raw copies were going for 15. 9.8s were all the way up to 250, whereas they were talking about that the Tombstone cover that comes in the black bag was only going for like 125 back then, so half of this. Now 5 to 15 on Superman 75, the flag cover. No recent 9.8 sales on this one. This book is definitely down, and I'll be back. And it's kind of just returned to where the long-term value of this book is, which is no surprise. We had the big event, like people were interested because of the 30th anniversary, and now the book is back where it was. Next, we're going to have a little bit of comic buzz. We have Ninja Funk #1. I guess it was a hot indie at the moment. Lots of covers for this one. They just were talking, CBSI was talking about that a lot of covers were selling, but they put the A on their list. I will admit, if you've noticed, there hasn't been any JP said, because this was a week I actually had to do other things, so I didn't do a cash or trash this week back then, so I didn't have a prediction here, and I didn't have a chance. The result of that is I didn't look up at the time what this book was going for, and CBSI didn't say in their little write-up what the book was going for, so I don't have any price to go off of what this book has done, but I will say it's now like a $2 to $10 book. So if it was even like 10, 15, this is a down and I'll be back. We're kind of putting this down and I'll be back just because of that, because the sales are pretty low. 9.8 is only going for 30. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the book wasn't even worth any more than this back then. But yeah, it seems pretty low. You can buy it for, well, less than cover and shipping. Those people are getting less than what they paid for it if they're selling it for $2 plus shipping. So yeah, definitely we're going to call this one a down, and I'll be back on Ninja Funk. Next, we got a couple of just keys that there wasn't really any speculation rumors or anything to put on here, but occasionally we'll get a key that just kind of jumps on the list. First up, we have Fantastic Four #72. Classic Silver Surfer cover from the Silver Age. Just maybe one of the best ones. Love this Kirby crackle. Love the Watcher in the background. Just a great Silver Surfer cover. hard to judge this one. Again, another book that I didn't, because I didn't do a cash or trash. I don't know what the values really were. This is one of those where Tom likes to say average sales of $800, but they're clearly including more than just raw sales into that. They're clearly including like some higher. Those values never really make sense unless you include some high grade slab sales. So yeah, the raw copy, that probably doesn't mean anything. 9.4 went for $26.50. No recent 9.4 sales. That's actually the last one recorded on Go Collect. 9.2s though are going for 600 to 1,000, so 1,000 or under. So I would guess 9.4s are probably down from that. Raw copies right now are 30 to 300, which is probably down a little bit. So we're going to overall just call this down, and I'll be back, which is pretty typical for which just the market's been trending here. Again, a little bit hard to judge because I didn't get a chance to actually look at the raw sales back then, but yeah, you can definitely do better than an average of 800 here. And it does appear like 9.2 and some other grades are down, and then I'll be back compared to what they were back then. And really that 9.4 $2,650 sale was a bit of an outlier even back then. Next, we have NYX number 3, the first appearance of Laura Kinney, X23. And that was basically hitting the list because it was having a little bit of a bounce back. It had been an $1,800 to $2,000 book for quite a while during, all the pandemic stuff and everything else, and even a little bit before that. It had fallen back to about a $1,200 to $1,200 book in a 9.8. Now it back then it jumped back up to like $1,300, $1,400. So they put it on the list. Now it's still a $1,200 to $1,400 book for 9.8. So it's basically been pretty steady, kind of. Maybe you could call it an I'll be back. Raw copies now are $450 to $600. I would love to see this book jump again a little more, but right now it's definitely kind of settled in and kind of just sitting around the range it was 6 months ago, which is up a little bit from where it fell to. Next, we have Omega Men number 3 for the second week in a row, the first appearance of Lobo. And this was completely back then speculation that James Gunn couldn't resist using this character in his DCU stuff. We will still see. We haven't officially gotten an announcement of any kind of Lobo project, but back then raw copies were averaging $100, 9.8, $350 to $375. Now it's a $50 to $100 book, 9.8, $340 to $360. So a down and an I'll be back, but not down much. A lot of value here just in Lobo in general. And so, yeah, you'd be better off if you'd waited. But I do think values are still pretty close to those range because people are still believing we're going to get Lobo. With that, we're going to move into a little Sony Spider-Verse stuff. And we have Amazing Spider-Man number 10, the first appearance of Spider-Punk. This was basically hitting the list because we've got some toy images that made it clear that Spider-Punk is going to be in Across the Spider-Verse, the animated movie. And we've since seen him in the trailers and stuff, so we know we're getting him. But back then, book jumped up to raw copies were going for 50 plus, 9.8, $250. Now raw copies are more in the $30 to $45 range, 9.8, $175 to $300. So borderline, you could say steady, I'll be back, but we went with down because the raw copies are definitely below 50. Most of the sales are in the $30 to $40 range. So down and I'll be back here on this one on Spider-Punk, which is interesting because we still know we're going to get him. My guess is it'll spike a little bit around the movie, but yeah, probably just going to settle in here around the value that I feel like it's mostly been at. So next we have MCU books. We have 4 MCU books to wrap up this list. We have Avengers World number 9, the first Azari T'Challa. So we had this last week. We had the first Azari, the son of Storm and Black Panther. This is a different alternate universe version that showed up in Avengers World number 9. This was still speculation that the kid in Black Panther was going to be that version of his son. The kid in the Black Panther movie had a completely different name. Clearly Storm's not involved. It's a completely different kid than this. But back then, raw copies were going for $20 to $25. And now you can't really sell them. There's listings from $5 to $25 on eBay for raw copies of this. The only sale involving this book over the last 3 months has been a set of the entire Avengers World run, which is 9 or 10 issues. I think it's 1 through 10, maybe it's 1 through 9, I forget now. but and it went for like $25. So the whole set of all the books, or maybe $30, I think. Now that I say that, but anyway, yeah, this is down in a dumpster fire. Nobody wants this book. Nobody cares about this character because that's not the character that showed up in the movie. Next, we have Black Panther #3, the first appearance of Tosin. The other thing people were specking on that the kid would be Tosin because the name was also started with a T, but it clearly wasn't Tosin, and it was clearly a different name, but people were still specking on Tosin. People have been specking on Tosin since the book came out about a year ago now. Raw copies back then jumped up to 80 to 90, which had been where they were at, and then they'd come down, and then they jumped back up to 80 and 90 with the movie. 9.8s were 200. Now it's a $25 to $60 book. 9.8's 90 to 150. So this has turned into a bit of a trap since the movie came out and just since those peaks. Still lots of value here. I mean, for a recent brand new character to be doing 25 to 60, 90 to 150, that's pretty good. Just not the crazy values people were chasing them back then. All right, 2 more books. We got Defenders #84. The first battle between Namor and Black Panther is what occurs in this book. That's why people are chasing it, even though, obviously, in the comic, this was T'Challa and Namor, and in the movie, it's Shuri and Namor because, well, we all know why. Because we lost Chadwick Boseman. But anyway, people were jumping on this. Raw copies were going for $80. And 9.6 went for 100, which makes me wonder about that average that Tom gave of 80. That seems probably high. Recent raw sales, though, 5 to 15, and then there was a couple of outliers. There was a $60 and a $70 raw sale. Obviously high grade, but there were some high grade ones that were going for like 15. So I wonder about those 2 sales because they're complete outliers. Everything else is literally 5 to 15. So I would, if you're trying to sell, you're most likely going to get the 5 to 15, a book that you bought for 80 back then, and not the 60 or 70. So that makes it kind of a dumpster fire. 9.4, couldn't find any 9.6 at sales. 9.4 is 50, 110. But when a book's that cheap and that high a grade, sometimes you get overlap between 9.4s and 9.6s. That's not unusual. But the raw sales, I would definitely call this a dumpster fire. Finally, our last book this week of our 16 is Shuri #1 from 2018. Her first solo series. Obviously, this was hitting the list as the movie was coming out. Raw copies were only 15 to 20, which was still down from some of the peaks when we had the rumors related to Shuri. 9.8, 120, also well down from when we had the rumors before the movie came out, a year or so before the movie came out that Shuri was going to be Black Panther. Yeah, this book was quite a bit higher than this, but these were the values at the movie, and it's backed up since then. 5 to 20 for a raw copy, so the heights are still kind of in that range, but most of the sales are below. 9.8, 80 to 90, so down and I'll be back. This book hasn't backed up a ton, but definitely down a little bit since we've moved away from the movie, and still well down from some of the heights with the rumors prior to the movie. So that is this week's list. We had 16 books. I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time.